The backstage area of America's Got Talent buzzed with the usual chaos: dancers stretching in the corner, magicians whispering last-minute tricks, a choir rehearsing softly. But in the middle of all the noise, Mira Santos stood completely still. Just 17. And already carrying a life inside her. She held her belly with one hand, her fingers trembling as though she were trying to steady both herself and the tiny heartbeat she protected. Her other hand clutched a microphone so cheap it still had a loose sticker from the pawnshop where she'd bought it. Around her, performers with glittering costumes and trained smiles radiated confidence. Mira simply looked small, scared, and yet strangely steady. Her long black hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. Her dress, a pale blue hand-me-down from a neighbor in Cebu, didn't quite fit her growing body. She had no makeup team, no stylist, no vocal coach. She had only a dream, and a strength she didn't realize she carried. A production assistant approached her with a clipboard. "Mira Santos." She nodded silently. "You're up in 3 minutes. Are you ready?" Mira wanted to say, no. No, she wasn't ready. No, she didn't belong here. No, she didn't even know if her voice was good enough. But then she felt a tiny flutter in her belly, her baby's gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. So instead, she whispered, "Yes." The assistant gave her a sympathetic smile, noticing the way her hands shook. "Take a deep breath," he said. "You're going to be okay." But Mira's lungs felt tight, as though the entire journey from Cebu to Los Angeles was pressing against her chest. She could barely hear anything over the pounding of her heart. In the distance, she heard the muffled roar of the audience reacting to the act before hers. Cheers. Applause. Laughter. None of it felt like it belonged to her. She stepped toward the side curtain where a sliver of the stage lights spilled through. The bright beam reminded her of something of the nights she used to sing outside the small food stall where she worked. There, the light came from a flickering street lamp. Here, it came from the biggest entertainment show on earth. But the fear was the same. She closed her eyes and pictured her mother's face, gentle, tired, loving. "Anak, singing is your heart speaking. Don't hide it." Her mother had said those words on the last night Mira ever heard her voice. A tear slipped down Mira's cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it quickly, makeup or not. She didn't want to cry before she even stepped on stage. Behind her, another contestant whispered to a friend, "She looks so young, is she okay?" Mira heard it, but she didn't react. People had been whispering about her ever since her belly began to show. Every whisper felt like a reminder of everything she wasn't: wealthy, stable, prepared, loved. But today wasn't about whispers. It was about being brave enough to stand anyway. Her name echoed across the speakers. "Next up, Mira Santos." The audience cheered, not knowing the story behind the small Filipina girl walking toward the spotlight. Not knowing she had traveled halfway across the world on donations from neighbors who believed her voice could change her life. Not knowing she had practiced her audition song in the bathroom of her cheap motel earlier that morning, trying not to wake the baby inside her. As she stepped onto the stage, the blinding lights washed over her like sunrise, breaking after a long night. For the first time in months, Mira inhaled deeply. Not as a frightened girl. Not as a pregnant teenager. But as someone who had one chance, just one, to show the world who she truly was. And she prayed that would be enough. Long before Mira Santos stood beneath the bright lights of AGT, she lived in a crowded neighborhood in Cebu where the streets smelled of sea breeze, grilled food, and the familiar dust of everyday struggle. Her life had always been simple, hard, yes, but simple. She woke up early to help her mother prepare rice, walked to school with secondhand books, and returned home to sing while washing laundry in a plastic basin. Her mother used to say, "Anak, your voice is a blessing. One day, it will open doors for you." Mira would laugh shyly, never believing it. She wasn't a star, she was just another girl trying to help her family survive. But life shifted the moment her mother fell ill. At first, it was just fatigue. Then it was chest pain. Then it was the hospital. And suddenly, 17-year-old Mira found herself choosing between buying medicine and buying food. She stopped going to school. She worked full-time at a small food stall by the roadside, handing out bowls of steaming arroz caldo to jeepney drivers. Her boss paid her in crumpled bills, barely enough for rent. But each night, as she wiped down the tables, she hummed softly the only thing that made her feel human after days filled with worry. Her mother, frail but full of pride, would listen from bed and whisper, "You sing like you're reaching for the sun." But the sun set too soon. One rainy night, with thunder shaking the windows, Mira held her mother's hand as the older woman whispered her final request. "Don't stop singing, Anik. It's the part of me that will live in you." Those were her last words. After the funeral, the silence in their small home became unbearable. Mira would sit on the bed her mother once slept on, tracing the edges of the pillow, wishing she could hear her voice again. Days blurred into nights, and nights blurred into something worse, loneliness. Then came the day Mira discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the test in disbelief. The boy she loved, the one she trusted, had vanished the moment she told him. She felt like the world was collapsing again, but this time there was no mother to hold her, no warm words to soften the pain. Her neighbors whispered. People at the stall stared. Some judged. Some pitied. But no one knew how afraid she was, how desperately she wanted to give her child a future that didn't look like hers. To survive, she worked more hours, ignoring the ache in her back as her pregnancy grew. But even exhaustion couldn't stop the one thing that kept her spirit alive: singing. She sang behind the stall when business was slow. She sang over pots of rice. She sang to the child inside her, hoping her voice could replace the lullabies she herself no longer had. One night, an elderly man who often bought soup approached her. "Mira," he said, "why do you sing like your heart is breaking and healing at the same time?" She shrugged, embarrassed. He smiled, showing wrinkles carved by years of hardship. "Your mother was right. You have a gift. Don't bury it." Days later, that same man brought her shocking news: the whole community had gathered money, small coins, humble bills, quiet sacrifices to buy her a plane ticket to America for the AGT auditions. Mira cried so hard she could barely breathe. "Why would you do this for me?" she whispered. The old man gently placed a hand over hers. "Because sometimes, Anak, the world shows kindness when you need it most. And because we all believe your voice can change your life." That night, Mira packed everything she owned into one small backpack. Clothes, her mother's photo, and her only treasure, the cheap microphone she'd saved for months to buy. With trembling hands and a brave heart, she boarded the plane, flying not just for herself, but for the child she carried and the mother she had lost. The moment Mira stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, the noise of the crowd hit her like a wave. Thousands of faces, glowing under the stage lights, stared back at her. Some were smiling, some curious. Others simply waiting to be entertained. But every pair of eyes felt heavy on her shoulders. Her heart thudded violently, too loud, too fast. Her breath trembled. Her hands felt cold despite the heat of the spotlight. The judges sat in front of her like four giants in a world she did not belong to. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, studying her with that familiar unreadable expression. Heidi Klum gave her a soft smile. Sofia Vergara looked intrigued. And Howie Mandel offered an encouraging nod. "Hello," Simon said, his voice echoing through the arena. "What's your name, darling?" "I'm Mira Santos," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And how old are you?" Howie asked kindly. She swallowed. 17. A few people in the crowd murmured. 17. So young. Too young to be standing there, visibly pregnant under the bright lights. Simon noticed. His expression softened in a way the audience didn't often get to see. "And what brings you here today?" There it was, the question she had feared most. Why was she here? Why had she flown across the world while carrying a child? Why had she stepped on this stage knowing she would be judged not only for her talent, but for her situation? Mira gripped the microphone. Her voice cracked as she answered. I came because I want my baby to know that her mother tried her best. That she didn't give up." She paused, blinking fast as tears threatened to fall. "And I want to honor my mother, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The entire auditorium fell silent. No whispering. No muttering. Just pure, still silence. Simon's expression shifted just slightly, but it was enough. Enough to tell her he understood more than he let on. "All right," he said gently. "Whenever you're ready, the stage is yours." The music cue was simple, an acoustic version of "You Are the Reason." Soft piano keys filled the air, slowly, delicately, like morning light sneaking through a window. Mira inhaled deeply. Her first note trembled. She felt her voice shake the way her hands were shaking. It wasn't the glamorous, flawless opening many singers on AGT had. It was raw, unsure, almost fragile. But it was honest. It came from a place of pain and hope woven together. People leaned forward. Her voice carried something real, something vulnerable. Something that made strangers suddenly care about the young Filipina girl on stage. She reached the next verse, and her voice grew just a little stronger. Not perfect. Not polished. But powerful in a different way. Halfway through, her nerves hit her again. Her throat tightened. Her voice faltered for a split second. But she didn't stop. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother's hands braiding her hair. She thought of the baby growing inside her. She thought of the warm smiles of her neighbors who believed in her more than she believed in herself. And then something shifted inside her. Her voice lifted. Fuller, richer, braver. The audience began to sway. A woman in the front row brushed away tears. Even Sofia Vergara leaned forward, mesmerized. For the first time since her mother's death, Mira felt like she wasn't alone. Every word she sang carried her story. Every note held a piece of her journey. Every breath was a promise to her baby, to her mother, to herself. When she reached the final chorus, her voice soared. Not because she was trying to impress, but because she finally believed her voice deserved to be heard. When the last note echoed out and faded into silence, the arena froze. And in that suspended moment between the final chord and the audience's reaction, Mira realized. No matter what happened next, she had already given the world everything she had. For a heartbeat. The entire arena stood frozen. Mira's last note still trembled faintly in the air, dissolving into a silence so thick you could almost touch it. She opened her eyes slowly, half afraid of what she might see: confusion, disappointment, polite smiles hiding polite rejection. But instead, she saw something she never expected. People leaning forward. Eyes shining. Faces softened, not with judgment, but with something else, something warm. Hope flickered inside her, but just as quickly, doubt returned. Had she done enough? Had she sung well enough? Had she shown the world who she truly was? Her knees trembled slightly. She steadied herself with one hand on her belly, breathing in shakily. And then it happened. A single clap. Then another. Then a wave, crashing, rising, echoing. The audience erupted into applause. But not just applause. It was the kind of applause that felt like a hug. The kind that said, "We see you. We hear you. We feel you." Mira blinked rapidly as her vision blurred with tears she could no longer hold back. On the judges' table, Sofia Vergara covered her mouth, visibly emotional. Heidi Klum wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Howie Mandel shook his head slowly in disbelief. But it was Simon Cowell who caught Mira's attention. He was sitting still. Too still. His eyes glistened, not dramatically, not for the cameras, but in a quiet way, as though something in her performance had reached deep inside him. "Mira," he said softly, "that was beautiful." The crowd cheered louder. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Simon leaned forward. "I want to ask you something," he said gently. "The moment you put your hand on your stomach, your voice changed. What were you thinking?" That question lodged in her chest like a stone. She took a shaky breath. I was thinking of my mother," she whispered. "And I was thinking of my baby. I want her to know her mother was brave. I want her to grow up knowing I didn't give up on myself, or on her." A hush fell again. This time, deeper. More personal. Mira's voice wavered, but she continued, "My mother used to tell me that singing was my way of speaking to the world. When she died, I stopped singing. But tonight, I felt like she was here, right beside me." Her hand pressed gently over her belly. "And I hope my baby felt it too." A soft, emotional gasp rippled through the audience. Then everything shifted. Mira felt something warm inside her, like a door opening. Like grief turning into light. As though speaking her truth had unlocked the part of her she had been burying for months. And then the breakthrough came. The audience began rising to their feet, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. A full standing ovation. People were crying openly. Some had hands over their hearts. Others simply stood frozen, overwhelmed by a performance that was less about technical perfection and more about raw, human vulnerability. Mira covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking as tears streamed down her face. She had never felt seen like this, never felt understood by so many people at once. Sofia Vergara leaned in. "Mira. You didn't just sing." Her voice cracked. "You told a story. Your story. And it touched all of us." Heidi added, "You sang with your heart. And that's the kind of voice people never forget." Mira lowered her head, crying silently, relief, gratitude, and disbelief merging into a single overwhelming wave. But in the midst of that emotional storm, one truth rose above everything else. For the first time since she'd lost her mother. For the first time since she'd learned she was going to be a teen mom. Mira felt proud of herself. Her voice, her story, her courage. They had finally reached the world. The applause still thundered around her as Mira stood frozen on stage, her hands still pressed to her belly, still catching her breath. The light seemed brighter now, not harsh or intimidating, but warm, as though the world itself had tilted to embrace her. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with a fragile, tentative hope. Simon Cowell leaned forward in his chair, eyes glistening, hand hovering over the golden button that could change her life forever. "Mira," he said softly, voice almost reverent, "you have touched all of us. Every single one of us. And I don't want you to wait another second to know how extraordinary you are." Her stomach tightened, not from nerves this time, but from the swirl of emotions threatening to spill over. Then, with a decisive press, the golden buzzer lit up in a cascade of shimmering gold. Confetti rained down like sunlight through autumn leaves, glittering and dancing across the stage. Mira gasped, covering her mouth, her tears falling freely now, not from fear, not from doubt, but from an overwhelming sense of being seen, acknowledged, and loved. The audience erupted into a standing ovation. Cheers, cries, applause, all blending into one uncontainable wave. Some were wiping tears, some holding hands to hearts, others simply gazing at her in stunned silence. Mira's voice trembled as she tried to whisper a word of thanks, but words failed her. It was only when she bent slightly to cradle her baby bump that the true depth of the moment hit her. The child she carried, the life growing within her, had already felt the love radiating from this room. The applause wasn't just for Mira, it was for her unborn child too, a promise that the world could be kind, that dreams could survive even in the hardest circumstances. Simon stood and gestured to her, his usually reserved demeanor replaced with something rare, sincerity. "Mira, I can't tell you how proud I am, not just of your talent, but of your courage. What you've done tonight is extraordinary. You've made us feel something we'll never forget." Heidi, Sophia, and Howie all nodded, voices breaking as they echoed the sentiment. Mira could hardly comprehend it, but she understood one thing clearly: she was no longer alone. For the first time since her mother's passing, since learning she was pregnant, she felt the comforting, unshakable presence of a world that believed in her. As the confetti continued to fall around her, Mira lowered herself to one knee, pressing both hands to her belly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered softly, tears dripping onto her dress. "I promise, we're going to be okay." Somewhere in the crowd, strangers who had no idea of her hardships were cheering for a girl whose story had just begun to unfold. And Mira realized something profound: the kindness, the generosity, and the belief of others had given her not just an opportunity but hope. A chance to rise, to give her baby a life filled with possibilities she never imagined for herself. She looked up at the judges, at the audience, at the sparkling stage lights, and took a shaky breath. Her voice, though still trembling, found strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. For seeing us." In that moment, Mira understood that life's greatest victories are not measured by applause or trophies, but by moments when courage, vulnerability, and love intersect. She had come to the stage with nothing but a dream and a heart full of fear, and she was leaving with a future, a community, and a promise that kindness can change everything. As she stepped off stage, still glowing in the golden light, Mira felt the warmth settle deep into her bones. For the first time in years, she felt whole, hopeful, and unafraid. And she knew, with every fiber of her being, that this was only the beginning not just of a journey on AGT, but of a life defined by love, resilience, and the unstoppable power of the human spirit.